In the vast expanse of the galaxy, where civilizations rise and fall like distant stars, there exists a universal truth that even the most advanced species have yet to comprehend: the power of a perfectly seasoned meal to bring the mightiest warrior to their knees. Commander Zefkaler of the Vraxian Imperial Fleet had conquered 17 star systems, faced death in the void of space countless times, and earned scars from battles that would make lesser beings weep. Yet nothing in his 2 centuries of existence had prepared him for what awaited him in the most unlikely of places: a small blue planet called Earth, where a peculiar species had turned the simple act of consuming nutrients into something that defied all logic and reason. What began as a routine diplomatic mission would become a journey that would shake the very foundations of everything he believed about strength, civilization, and what it truly meant to be alive. For in the hands of humanity, even the simplest ingredients could become weapons of mass pleasure, capable of overwhelming senses that have been hardened by a lifetime of war. This is the story of how a single bite changed not just one alien's perspective, but the fate of 2 civilizations forever. Commander Zefkaler stood on the bridge of the Vraxian warship Dominion's edge, his 4 arms crossed behind his back as he studied the blue-green planet rotating slowly before them. Earth, the humans called it. Such a simple name for a world that had somehow managed to hold its own against 3 different alien invasion attempts in the past decade. The massive Vraxian's scaled hide rippled with barely contained energy as he processed the intelligence reports scrolling across his neural interface. The Vraxians were known throughout the galaxy as the ultimate warriors. Their society had been built on conquest, their bodies evolved for combat, and their technology designed for one purpose: overwhelming superiority in battle. Standing nearly 8 feet tall with dense bone plating beneath their scales, multiple arms that could crush steel, and reflexes that bordered on supernatural, they had never encountered a species that could match them in single combat. Yet these humans had done something unprecedented. They had not defeated the Vraxians through superior firepower or advanced technology. Instead, they had done something so unexpected, so utterly alien to Vraxian thinking, that it had forced the Empire to reconsider their entire approach to this small, seemingly insignificant world. The humans had invited them to dinner. Commander, his second-in-command, Lieutenant Vextar, approached with the characteristic heavy footsteps of their kind. The human delegation has confirmed the meeting arrangements. They insist on what they call a cultural exchange dinner before any formal negotiations begin. Zefkaler's inner eyelids flickered, a sign of deep contemplation among his people. In his 2 centuries of life, he had participated in countless diplomatic meetings, prisoner exchanges, and surrender ceremonies. All of them had followed predictable patterns: displays of strength, formal protocols, and carefully measured exchanges of information. None had ever involved food consumption as anything more than basic sustenance. The Vraxian diet was simple and efficient: nutrient cubes, protein supplements, and occasionally the raw flesh of conquered prey consumed purely for its practical value. Food was fuel, nothing more. The concept that an entire species would spend significant time, resources, and creative energy on the preparation and consumption of meals was as foreign to him as pacifism would be to a berserker. What intelligence do we have about their food preparation rituals? Zefkaler asked, his gravelly voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded fleets across star systems. Our scouts report that humans engage in elaborate processes involving heat application, chemical combinations, and what appears to be artistic presentation of their nutritional intake, Vextar replied, consulting his datapad. They spend hours each day in this activity, despite having technology that could deliver optimal nutrition in concentrated forms. Zefkaler's 4 eyes narrowed. Inefficiency was a cardinal sin in Vraxian culture. Resources were meant to be maximized, time was meant to be optimized, and every action should serve a clear strategic purpose. The idea that an entire civilization would waste precious time and energy on unnecessary food preparation suggested either profound stupidity or some hidden advantage that Vraxian intelligence had failed to identify. Perhaps it is a form of psychological warfare, suggested Vextar, a method of demonstrating abundance and resources to intimidate potential enemies. The commander considered this. It was possible. Human military tactics had proven surprisingly sophisticated despite their relatively primitive technology. They had defeated Zeltarian assault forces through unconventional strategies, driven back Crystalline Empire scout fleets using improvised weapons, and somehow convinced 3 different alien species to retreat without achieving their conquest objectives. We will observe their customs, Zethkaler decided. If this food ritual provides insight into their psychological weaknesses or strategic thinking, the intelligence value alone justifies the time investment. As the Vraxian shuttle descended through Earth's atmosphere, Zethkaler reviewed everything known about human physiology. They were remarkably fragile compared to Vraxians, with soft skin instead of protective scales, single hearts instead of the 3-chamber cardiovascular system that made Vraxians nearly indestructible, and laughably limited physical strength. An average Vraxian could literally tear a human in half without significant effort. Yet somehow, these soft, weak creatures had developed weapons that could punch through Vraxian armor, tactics that confused and frustrated experienced military commanders, and now they were attempting some form of cultural manipulation through food preparation. The contradiction fascinated and frustrated him in equal measure. The shuttle landed in what the humans called Central Park in their city of New York. Zethkaler had specifically requested a meeting location that would demonstrate human urban planning and resource management. What he saw through the shuttle's viewports defied his expectations yet again. Instead of efficient utilitarian structures designed for maximum functionality, human architecture seemed almost deliberately wasteful of space and resources. Buildings stretched toward the sky in aesthetically pleasing but structurally unnecessary configurations. Green spaces were scattered throughout the urban landscape despite serving no apparent strategic purpose. And everywhere, humans moved with an unhurried pace that suggested either supreme confidence or complete ignorance of proper threat assessment protocols. Ambassador Sarah Chun waited for them outside the shuttle, flanked by a small security detail that was clearly ceremonial rather than practical. The woman stood barely 5.5 feet tall, weighed perhaps 1/10 of what Zethkaler did, and yet she smiled at him with the kind of confidence usually reserved for beings who could bench press a small vehicle. "Commander Zethkaler," she said, extending one small, soft hand in the human greeting gesture. "Welcome to Earth. I hope you're hungry." The question confused him. Hunger was a biological function, not a social condition. Either his nutritional requirements were met or they were not. The concept of hoping someone experience hunger made no logical sense. "I have consumed adequate nutrition for the next 18 hours, he replied formally. "My biological systems are operating at optimal efficiency." Sarah's smile widened, and Zethkaler noticed something in her expression that he had learned to recognize in other species. The look of someone who knew something you didn't. "Well, Commander, I think you're in for quite an experience." They traveled through the human city in a ground vehicle that was simultaneously more and less advanced than Zethkaler had expected. The propulsion system was crude compared to Vraxian technology, yet the interior was filled with seemingly unnecessary comfort features. Soft seating surfaces, ambient lighting controls, and a complex audio system that filled the space with what humans called music. Music was another human peculiarity that Vraxian intelligence had noted but failed to understand. Organized sound patterns that served no communication function, conveyed no tactical information, and accomplished no practical objective. Yet humans seemed to derive some form of satisfaction from creating and experiencing these audio arrangements. As they drove, Sarah pointed out various landmarks and explained human urban development philosophy. She spoke of concepts like community gathering spaces, artistic expression, and quality of life improvements as if these were legitimate governmental priorities rather than inefficient resource allocation. "Tell me about your food preparation rituals," Zethkaler said, cutting through what he considered unnecessary cultural exposition. Our intelligence suggests your species invests significant time and energy in elaborate nutritional consumption procedures. Oh, it's so much more than that, Sarah replied, her eyes lighting up with an enthusiasm that seemed disproportionate to the topic. Food isn't just about nutrition for us. It's about culture, creativity, emotion, memory, social bonding, artistic expression, and sensory experience all wrapped up together. Zeth processed this statement and found it lacking in logical consistency. Nutrition serves the function of maintaining biological operations. Additional complexity serves no evolutionary advantage and wastes valuable resources. That's exactly what the Zoltarians said, Sarah laughed. Right before they spent 3 hours trying to figure out how we made chocolate taste so good. The vehicle stopped in front of a building that exemplified everything inefficient about human architecture. It was only 3 stories tall despite being located in prime urban real estate, covered in unnecessary decorative elements, and surrounded by more of the inexplicable green spaces humans seem to value. A sign read, Mama Rosa's Italian Kitchen, in flowing script that prioritized aesthetics over readability. Inside, the inefficiency became even more pronounced. The space was filled with individual tables sized for small groups rather than efficient communal feeding stations. Soft lighting created an ambience that served no tactical purpose. Aromatic compounds filled the air, triggering Zethkaler's enhanced olfactory systems in ways he had never experienced. The smells were unlike anything in his experience. Vraxian food, when it had any scent at all, carried the simple, clean odors of properly processed nutrition. This human establishment assaulted his senses with layers upon layers of complex aromatic information. Herbs he couldn't identify, cooking processes that seemed to transform basic compounds into entirely different substances, and underlying notes that activated regions of his brain that had never been stimulated before. Ah, you must be our special guests. A human female approached their table with the same inexplicable confidence Sarah had displayed. She was older, shorter, and even more physically insignificant than the ambassador, yet she moved with the authority of a seasoned military commander. I'm Rosa, and tonight you're going to experience something that will change your entire perspective on food. Zethkaler doubted this claim significantly. He had eaten the cuisine of 47 different alien species during his diplomatic career. While some had been more palatable than others, none had fundamentally altered his understanding of nutrition consumption. We'll start you off easy, Rosa continued, apparently interpreting his silence as agreement. A little bread to warm up your palate. She disappeared into what the humans called the kitchen, leaving Zethkaler alone with Sarah and his own mounting confusion. Through the opening to the food preparation area, he could observe human food service workers engaged in what appeared to be a coordinated dance of precise movements, heat application, and ingredient combination that displayed the kind of timing and skill usually reserved for military operations. The bread arrived first, and Zethkaler's confusion deepened. It was warm, which served no practical purpose since temperature had minimal impact on nutritional value. The surface was golden brown and covered with aromatic compounds that made his respiratory system involuntarily increase its processing rate. A small dish accompanied it, containing a yellow substance that Rosa explained was butter infused with roasted garlic and fresh herbs. Sarah demonstrated the human custom of applying the yellow substance to the bread before consumption. Her expression as she bit into the prepared food was unlike anything Zethkaler had observed in his studies of human behavior. Her eyes closed, her facial muscles relaxed into what could only be described as an expression of intense satisfaction, and she made a small sound that seemed to indicate pleasure. Your turn, Commander. Zethkaler examined the bread with the same careful attention he would give to potentially hostile alien technology. It appeared to be composed of processed grain products that had been subjected to heat treatment and chemical leavening agents. The yellow substance was clearly some form of dairy fat combined with aromatic plant compounds. Nothing about the combination suggested any properties beyond basic nutritional delivery. He bit into the bread, expecting the familiar experience of efficient nutrition consumption, and instead discovered that everything he understood about food had been fundamentally wrong. The first sensation was textural. The outer surface provided resistance that gave way to a soft, warm interior that seemed to dissolve against his tongue. The dairy fat created a coating that amplified and extended every other flavor, while the garlic and herb compounds activated taste receptors he hadn't known existed. But the most profound shock came from the combination effect. Individual ingredients that would have been unremarkable in isolation somehow created a synergistic experience that was exponentially greater than the sum of its parts. The bread wasn't just providing calories and nutrients. It was creating a cascade of neurological responses that triggered satisfaction systems in his brain that had never been activated by nutrition consumption. For the first time in his 2 centuries of existence, Commander Zethkaler understood why a species might spend time and energy on food preparation that went beyond mere nutritional efficiency. And this was just the bread. The second course arrived while Zethkaler was still processing the neurological aftermath of the bread experience. Rosa approached their table carrying a large, flat plate that radiated heat and aromatic compounds, so complex his enhanced olfactory system struggled to catalog them all. Fresh caprese salad with heirloom tomatoes, buffalo mozzarella, and basil from my own garden, she announced, setting the plate before him with the pride of a warrior displaying a conquered enemy's weapons. Zethkaler stared at the arrangement, trying to reconcile what he was seeing with his understanding of practical nutrition. 3 ingredients had been arranged in alternating patterns that served no functional purpose beyond what humans called visual appeal. The tomatoes had been sliced to uniform thickness despite the fact that consumption efficiency would be improved by simply quartering them. The white substance called mozzarella had been formed into perfect spheres, and green leaves were placed with geometric precision between each element. "It's art," Sarah explained, noticing his confusion. "Humans have this wonderful ability to take simple ingredients and transform them into something that pleases multiple senses simultaneously. Art, another human concept that Vraxian culture had dismissed as resource inefficiency. In their society, objects either served practical functions or they were discarded. The idea of creating something purely for aesthetic appreciation was as foreign as deliberately weakening one's military defenses. Yet as Zethkaler observed the careful arrangement before him, something in his neural processing recognized patterns and proportions that triggered unexpected positive responses. The colors complemented each other in ways that seemed to activate visual processing centers associated with pleasure and satisfaction. The geometric arrangement created balance and harmony that appealed to cognitive systems he hadn't known were connected to food consumption. "The key," Rosa said, drizzling golden liquid over the arranged ingredients, "is letting each component maintain its individual character while creating harmony with the others. Good olive oil doesn't overpower, it enhances." She sprinkled black granules over the entire arrangement and added what appeared to be crystalline formations that caught the ambient light. Fresh cracked pepper and sea salt to bring out the natural flavors. Zethkaler picked up the eating implement Sarah had shown him and carefully sectioned a portion that included all 3 primary ingredients. The first bite initiated a cascade of sensory experiences that made the bread seem simple in comparison. The tomato exploded with liquid that carried concentrated flavors of earth, sunshine, and something indefinable that could only be described as the essence of growth itself. The mozzarella provided creamy richness that moderated and extended the tomato's intensity while contributing its own subtle complexity. The basil added aromatic compounds that seemed to lift the entire combination into a completely different category of experience. But the olive oil transformed everything. Rather than simply adding fat contents he had expected, it created a unifying medium that carried and amplified every other flavor while contributing its own notes of fruit and earth and something ancient and fundamental. The salt crystals didn't just provide sodium. They seemed to awaken taste receptors and intensify every other element exponentially. For several moments, Zethkaler sat motionless, processing sensations for which his language had no adequate vocabulary. The combination wasn't just nutritionally satisfying. It was triggering neurological responses associated with pleasure, comfort, and a strange sense of well-being that had nothing to do with biological needs being met. "How is this possible?" he asked, his voice carrying a note of confusion that would have been embarrassing in any other context. Rosa smiled with the satisfaction of someone who had successfully demonstrated a superior technology. "Humans have been perfecting the art of cooking for thousands of years. We've learned that food isn't just fuel for the body, it's nourishment for the soul." Soul, another untranslatable human concept that seemed to refer to consciousness aspects beyond mere cognitive function. Vraxian philosophy acknowledged mind and body as functional systems, but humans consistently referenced something additional, something that transcended practical existence. Each ingredient was chosen not just for its nutritional content, but for how it interacts with the others, Sarah explained between bites. The acidity in the tomatoes balances the richness of the cheese. The basil adds aromatic complexity that enhances both. The olive oil carries flavors and creates texture. The salt amplifies everything. It's chemistry and art and tradition all working together. Zethkaler consumed the remainder of the salad with focused attention, trying to understand the principles that govern these ingredient combinations. Clearly, humans had developed sophisticated knowledge about how different compounds interacted with their sensory systems. This wasn't random. It was applied science disguised as artistic expression. The third course arrived before he had fully processed the implications of the second. This time, Rosa carried a covered container that released aromatic clouds when she lifted the lid. "Osso buco with saffron risotto," she announced. "Braised veal shanks with vegetables, served with rice that's been slowly cooked with stock and wine." The visual presentation was even more elaborate than the previous courses. The meat had been prepared in a way that emphasized both its natural structure and its transformation through cooking processes. The rice had been formed into a precise mound beside it, with colors ranging from deep gold to creamy white. Vegetables that had been cut into geometric shapes surrounded the meat, their colors intensified by whatever cooking processes had been applied. Zethkaler cut a section of meat and immediately noticed that whatever had been done to it had fundamentally altered its character. Vraxian meat consumption typically involved fresh kills consumed raw, preserving the natural textures and flavors of the prey species. This human preparation had transformed the protein into something entirely different. The meat separated with minimal pressure from his eating implement, indicating that lengthy cooking processes had broken down the structural proteins. When he placed it in his mouth, it seemed to dissolve while releasing layers of flavor that had been concentrated and intensified through whatever preparation methods had been used. But the complexity went far beyond simple meat consumption. The cooking liquid had been absorbed into the protein matrix, carrying flavors of vegetables, herbs, and what Sarah explained was wine, a fermented fruit beverage that humans consumed for recreational purposes as well as cooking applications. The combination created depth and richness that transformed a simple protein source into something approaching art. The rice proved equally transformative. Instead of the bland, efficient grain consumption Zethkaler was familiar with, each grain had been infused with aromatic compounds and cooking liquids that created layers of flavor and texture. The saffron, Rosa explained, was one of the most valuable spices on Earth, worth more than precious metals and used in minute quantities to add both color and subtle flavor notes that enhanced everything else. "The secret is patience," Rosa said, observing his careful analysis of each bite. "Good food can't be rushed." The meat braised for 4 hours, low and slow, until it became tender enough to cut with a fork. The risotto requires constant attention, adding stock gradually while stirring continuously. You have to understand the ingredients and respect their timing. Patience, another concept that challenged Vraxian military efficiency. In combat, speed and decisiveness were paramount. Hesitation meant death, and prolonged operations were signs of poor planning or inadequate resources. Yet this human was describing 4-hour cooking processes as if time investment improved rather than degraded the final product. Why would extended cooking times improve the nutritional value? Zeth Kaler asked. It's not about nutrition, Sarah replied. Well, not entirely. Slow cooking breaks down tough proteins, concentrates flavors, and allows ingredients to blend and complement each other in ways that quick preparation can't achieve. It's about creating something that nourishes more than just your body. As Zeth Kaler continued eating, he began to understand what she meant. The food was triggering responses that went beyond simple biological satisfaction. Each bite seemed to activate neural pathways associated with comfort, pleasure, and a strange sense of emotional well-being that had no connection to his nutritional status. His enhanced metabolism, designed for battlefield efficiency, was processing the meal at optimal rates. Yet instead of simply converting the nutrients to usable energy, his system seemed to be extracting additional value from the consumption experience itself. Areas of his brain normally dormant except during combat success or territorial conquest were showing activity patterns he had never experienced. The fourth course arrived as he was finishing the osso buco, and Rosa's expression suggested that everything previous had been merely preparation for what was to come. Chocolate lava cake with vanilla gelato, she announced, setting before him what appeared to be a small, dark cylinder topped with a white substance and garnished with red berries. Zeth Kaler had encountered chocolate in intelligence reports about human recreational consumption, but he had categorized it with other inefficient pleasure-seeking behaviors. The fact that an entire civilization would dedicate agricultural resources to producing a substance with minimal nutritional value had seemed to confirm human irrationality. Cut into the cake, Sarah suggested, her expression carrying the same anticipation he had seen on Vraxian faces before major battle engagements. When his eating implement penetrated the outer layer, dark liquid flowed out, carrying aromatic compounds so intense they seemed to trigger involuntary pleasure responses in his olfactory system. The contrast between the warm, flowing interior and the structured exterior created textural complexity that his sensory processors struggled to catalog. The first bite of chocolate cake combined with the cold vanilla gelato created such an overwhelming sensory experience that Zeth Kaler's primary consciousness briefly disconnected from external awareness. The chocolate-activated taste receptors he hadn't known existed, triggering neurochemical cascades that flooded his system with satisfaction compounds normally released only during successful combat or territorial expansion. The vanilla gelato provided cooling contrast that extended and amplified the chocolate's intensity while contributing its own subtle complexity. The temperature differential created additional textural interest, while the combination of flavors seemed to activate pleasure centers in his brain with the intensity of a controlled neurological stimulation. For the first time in his adult life, Commander Zeth Kaler, veteran of countless battles and conqueror of star systems, made an involuntary sound of pure pleasure. The sound surprised him almost as much as the experience that had caused it. Vraxian warriors were trained from childhood to maintain emotional control under all circumstances. Involuntary vocalizations indicated loss of discipline and were considered serious character flaws. Yet the combination of flavors, textures, and temperatures had overwhelmed his neural processing to the point where normal behavioral controls had temporarily ceased functioning. The experience was so profoundly satisfying that his conscious mind had briefly surrendered to pure sensory absorption. Good, Rosa asked, though her expression suggested she already knew the answer. Zeth Kaler realized that his understanding of human civilization had been fundamentally flawed. A species capable of creating experiences this sophisticated, this precisely engineered to trigger maximum pleasure responses, possessed technology that was in some ways more advanced than anything in the Vraxian arsenal. They had weaponized satisfaction itself. The following morning, Zethkaler stood in his quarters aboard the Dominion's edge, staring at his reflection in the polished metal surface that served as a mirror. For 2 centuries, that reflection had shown him a perfect specimen of Vraxian warrior evolution. Scales unmarked by any weapon that could penetrate them, for arms that could tear apart battle mechs, and eyes that had never shown doubt or confusion. Today, those same eyes reflected something that concerned and fascinated him in equal measure. The previous night's meal had initiated cognitive processes that continued hours after consumption had ended. His enhanced neural networks, designed for tactical analysis and threat assessment, were dedicated to processing memories of flavors, textures, and sensory combinations that had no strategic value whatsoever. This was unprecedented. Vraxian minds were engineered for efficiency. Irrelevant data was automatically purged from active memory to maintain optimal cognitive performance. Yet his consciousness seemed unwilling to release the experience of chocolate lava cake, returning to it repeatedly despite his attempts to focus on military planning and diplomatic preparations. Lieutenant Vextar entered without announcement, as was proper among military personnel of equal standing. His expression carried the focused intensity of someone delivering important intelligence. "Commander, we've received reports from our diplomatic advance team," Vextar said, consulting his data display. 3 of our reconnaissance specialists attended similar food consumption events with human contacts yesterday. All 3 have requested extended assignment to Earth for what they term cultural analysis purposes. Zethkaler's inner eyelids flickered. Vraxian personnel requesting extended assignments to alien worlds was virtually unprecedented. Their culture valued efficiency, and diplomatic missions were typically completed as quickly as possible to minimize resource expenditure and return military assets to useful deployment. What specific cultural analysis do they believe requires extended study? They claim that human food preparation represents a previously unknown form of sensory engineering that requires detailed investigation. Vextar replied. Specialist Cal Moore specifically mentioned something called barbecue that he described as meat preparation techniques that transcend normal palatability parameters. Zethkaler found himself involuntarily interested in this barbecue concept, despite having no logical reason for such interest. His tactical mind immediately categorized this response as problematic. Irrelevant curiosity was a luxury that military commanders could not afford. Have you analyzed their reports for signs of psychological compromise or alien influence? Medical scans show no indication of chemical manipulation or neurological tampering, Vextar confirmed. However, all 3 subjects show elevated activity in brain regions associated with reward anticipation and memory formation. They appear to be experiencing residual satisfaction responses from yesterday's consumption events. This information aligned with Zethkaler's own neurological status. Even now, 18 hours after the meal had ended, his consciousness continued to return to specific moments. The way the osso bucco had separated under minimal pressure, the temperature contrast between the chocolate cake and vanilla gelato, the complex aromatic layering of the Capri salad. Request permission to investigate this phenomenon personally, Vextar continued. If humans have developed some form of psychological warfare based on sensory manipulation, we need to understand its mechanisms and potential applications. The logic was sound, but Zethkaler suspected his second-in-command's motivations were more complex than pure military analysis. The same curiosity that was driving his own thought processes seemed to be affecting other Vraxian personnel who had been exposed to human cuisine. Granted, he replied, but maintain full psychological monitoring. If this represents some form of alien mind control technology, we need to document its effects on Vraxian neural systems. After Vextar departed, Zethkaler returned to his analysis of the previous night's experience. As a military strategist, he had learned to examine enemy capabilities from multiple angles, looking for weaknesses that could be exploited and strengths that needed to be countered. Human cuisine seemed to represent both simultaneously. The weakness was obvious. A civilization that dedicated enormous resources to unnecessary food preparation was fundamentally inefficient. The energy expenditure required to transform simple nutrients into complex culinary experiences could have been directed toward military development, technological advancement, or territorial expansion. Yet the strength was more subtle and potentially more dangerous. Humans had developed the ability to create experiences so profoundly satisfying that they could override rational thought processes in species specifically evolved for tactical thinking. If this was intentional psychological warfare, it represented a sophistication that Vraxian intelligence had completely underestimated. His communications system activated, displaying Ambassador Chen's image. She appeared to be in a different human food preparation facility, surrounded by cooking equipment and ingredients he couldn't identify. "Good morning, Commander," she said, her expression carrying that same confident satisfaction he was beginning to recognize as distinctly human. "I hope you enjoyed last night's dinner." "The experience was educational," he replied carefully. "We would appreciate the opportunity to observe additional food preparation techniques for analytical purposes." Sarah's smile widened. "I was hoping you'd say that. How would you feel about a cooking lesson?" The concept confused him. "You wish to train us in food preparation procedures? I think you'd find it fascinating to understand how those flavors you experienced are actually created," she replied. "There's something magical about taking raw ingredients and transforming them into something that brings joy. Plus, I have a feeling you might have a natural talent for it." Zeth Kaler doubted this assessment. Vraxian culture had no context for activities that combine precision with creativity, technical skill with artistic expression. Their society valued clear categories: military operations, technological development, resource management, and territorial control. Activities that crossed these boundaries were considered inefficient distractions. However, his tactical analysis suggested that understanding human food preparation methods could provide valuable intelligence about their resource allocation, technological capabilities, and psychological motivations. If humans were willing to demonstrate their techniques, the strategic value of this information could be significant. "We accept your educational offer," he replied. 2 hours later, Zeth Kaler found himself in the kitchen of Rosa's restaurant, wearing what humans called an apron and attempting to comprehend the controlled chaos of professional food preparation. The space was filled with equipment that seemed to serve single, specialized purposes: devices for chopping, mixing, heating, cooling, measuring, and timing that represented a level of functional specificity that impressed and bewildered him. Rosa moved through this environment with the fluid efficiency of a seasoned combat veteran, her small hands manipulating multiple processes simultaneously while maintaining awareness of temperature, timing, and ingredient interactions that seemed to require computational abilities beyond normal human capacity. "Today we're making pasta from scratch," she announced, setting before him a pile of flour, several eggs, and a container of what appeared to be green liquid. "Fresh basil pesto with handmade fettuccine." The concept of making pasta from basic ingredients struck Zeth Kaler as fundamentally irrational. Processed food products were available that would provide equivalent nutritional value with fraction of the time and energy investment. Yet, as Rosa demonstrated the technique of creating dough from flour and eggs, he began to understand that efficiency wasn't the objective. "Feel the dough," she instructed, guiding his primary hands through the process of kneading. "It should be smooth and elastic, but not sticky. You have to develop the gluten structure, but not overwork it." The tactile experience was unlike anything in his background. Vraxian technology emphasized minimal physical contact with materials. Their tools were designed to maximize leverage and minimize the need for manual manipulation. Yet this process required direct sensory feedback, understanding material properties through touch, and making adjustments based on subtle changes in texture and resistance. As he worked the dough, following Rose's instructions about pressure, folding techniques, and timing, Zeth Kaler discovered something unexpected. The process was engaging cognitive systems that had never been stimulated by military training or technological operations. The requirement to monitor multiple variables simultaneously while making continuous micro-adjustments activated problem-solving pathways that felt both familiar and entirely new. "Good," Rosa said, observing his technique. "You're getting the feel for it." Cooking is all about developing intuition for how ingredients behave under different conditions. Intuition, another concept that challenged Vraxian thinking. Their culture valued data-driven analysis, predictable outcomes, and systematic approaches to problem-solving. Intuition suggested decision-making based on incomplete information, which was considered a dangerous liability in military contexts. Yet as the dough transformed under his manipulation, Zethkaler began to understand what Rosa meant. The material was providing constant feedback about its internal structure, moisture content, and development state that couldn't be measured by instruments, but could be perceived through direct contact. Learning to interpret this information required developing sensitivity to subtle changes that could only be acquired through experience. The pesto preparation proved even more complex. Rosa demonstrated how different herbs required different handling techniques to preserve their aromatic compounds, how olive oil quality affected flavor development, and how the balance between garlic, nuts, and cheese could be adjusted to create completely different taste profiles. "Taste as you go," she instructed, offering him a spoon with a small portion of the developing sauce. "Your palate will tell you what the mixture needs." This concept challenged everything Zethkaler understood about measurement and precision. Vraxian technology depended on exact specifications and repeatable processes. The idea that optimal results could only be achieved through subjective sensory evaluation seemed to contradict basic engineering principles. Yet when he tasted the pesto, his enhanced sensory systems immediately identified areas where the flavor balance could be improved. The garlic intensity needed slight reduction, the salt content required minimal increase, and the olive oil proportions could be adjusted to better carry the herb characteristics. "Add more pine nuts," he suggested, surprising himself with his confident assessment. Rosa followed his recommendation, and the resulting mixture achieved a complexity and balance that was measurably superior to the previous version. Somehow, his biological sensory systems had performed analysis that would have required laboratory equipment to quantify. When the fresh pasta was combined with the finished pesto, the result was another sensory experience that transcended simple nutrition consumption. The texture of handmade noodles was dramatically different from processed alternatives, providing resistance and absorption characteristics that enhanced flavor delivery. The pesto, warm from mixing with the hot pasta, released aromatic compounds that hadn't been present at room temperature. But the most profound realization came from understanding that he had participated in creating the experience. The satisfaction he derived from consuming the meal was amplified by knowledge of the processes and decisions that had produced it. Having manipulated the ingredients personally, having made adjustments based on sensory feedback, having invested time and attention in the preparation created emotional connections to the food that pure consumption couldn't provide. For the first time, Zethkaler began to understand why humans invested such enormous resources in food preparation. They weren't just feeding their bodies. They were engaging multiple cognitive systems simultaneously, creating experiences that satisfied psychological needs he hadn't known existed, and participating in creative processes that provided fulfillment beyond mere efficiency. As he consumed the pasta he had helped create, surrounded by humans who had shared their knowledge and techniques with patient generosity, Commander Zethkaler began to suspect that his civilization's definition of strength might be incomplete. Perhaps true power wasn't just the ability to conquer and control, but the capacity to create experiences that made existence worth conquering for.